Terrence McNally. Welcome to Freeform, a world that just might work. I'll be speaking today with Bill Hartung and Ben Freeman about their new book, The $1 Trillion War Machine: How Runaway Military Spending Drives America into Foreign Wars and Bankrupts Us at Home. You can learn more about both of them at the website of the Quincy Institute, and that's Quincy, Quincy, INST, and that's where it stops, quincyinst.org. On Freeform, we explore the lives, the work, the ideas of individuals that I suspect have pieces of the puzzle of a world that just might work. We look at politics, economics, environment, science, health, culture, all based on the fact that I believe we can do better, and I want to find out how. The show streams weekly on the Progressive Voices Network on TuneIn.com, and podcasts are available anytime, anywhere on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, most major podcast sites, and at my site, terrencemcnally.net, TERRENCEMCNALLY.net. It's hard to pick up a book, and I'll pick it up right now, The $1 Trillion War Machine, about runaway military spending, and not think about President Dwight Eisenhower's warning against the military-industrial complex in his farewell address in 1961. Today's guests are here to reveal how much worse it's gotten than anything he might have imagined. Turns out the last president to command troops was also the last one to stand up to the war industry. The defense budget has doubled in real dollars. And Bill Hartung and Ben Freeman expand the definition of the military-industrial complex, in my mind, to the military, industrial, political, media, entertainment, sports complex. And I'll ask them to briefly go over how each of these enablers play their roles. Ike's warning has been ignored. We three in this conversation today owe a bit of a debt to another conservative soldier, Andrew Bacevich. Introducing our 2008 conversation about his book, The Limits of Power, The End of American Exceptionalism, I said, I believe Andrew Bacevich in his new book pulls things together, things like our politics of personality, the rise of the imperial presidency, and our national culture of consumption. I say each week that I'm looking for pieces of the puzzle, and I believe today's guest is pulling some of them together in ways that make our problems clearer and change more possible. At the time, he was a professor of history and international relations at Boston University. He'd served 23 years in the U.S. Army, retiring with the rank of colonel, and had lost his son in Iraq the year before. A graduate of the U.S. Military Academy, Bacevich received his PhD in American diplomatic history from Princeton. I ended my introduction to my 2010 conversation about his book, Washington Rules, with these words. I fear that we will speak for an hour, wise things will be said, and nothing will change. If the tragedy of Vietnam, the fall of the Soviet Union, the ongoing disasters in Iraq and Afghanistan have not brought change, what can we hope to accomplish in an hour? Andrew Bacevich is a co-founder in 2019 and the president of the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft, a nonprofit research organization and think tank that advocates for, quote, a less militarized and more cooperative foreign policy, unquote. Initial funding, this is interesting, included $500,000 each from George Soros's Open Society Foundations and Charles Koch's Koch Foundation. According to Bacevich, the purpose of the Institute is to, quote, promote restraint as a central principle of U.S. foreign policy, fewer wars, and more effective diplomatic engagement. Bill Hartung is a senior research fellow, and Ben Freeman is director of the Democratizing Foreign Policy program at the Quincy Institute. At the peak of the Reagan military buildup in 1985, the U.S. was spending over $100 billion less than we are now. Yet the military was twice as large by almost every metric: planes, ships, troops. That drove my guests to ask, why is this happening? How are we spending more every year but getting less? What's being wasted? And why does effectiveness keep declining? The title of their new book together, $1 Trillion War Machine, carries a double meaning. It is about a $1 trillion a year machine for waging wars, but it is also about $1 trillion a year machine for creating them. Defense spending gets very little meaningful discussion in Congress, the media, or the public. And I assume this reflects the fact that no one expects anything to change, so why bother? But this is a bit crazy, considering the costs, the consequences, the stakes, the danger, and the impact on society, as well as the military track record of consistent failure since World War II. How can this be? How can it change? That's what we'll talk about. Ben Freeman is director of the Democratizing Foreign Policy program at the Quincy Institute. Before joining Quincy, Ben founded the Foreign Influence Transparency Initiative at the Center for International Policy. He served as deputy director of the National Security Program at Third Way and was a National Security Fellow at the Project on Government Oversight. He's the author of The Foreign Policy Auction, the first book to systematically analyze the foreign influence industry in the U.S. William D. Hartung is a senior research fellow at the Quincy Institute. He's an expert on the arms trade, Pentagon spending and strategy, and nuclear weapons. He's previously director of the Arms and Security Program at the Center for International Policy, co-director of the Center's Sustainable Defense Task Force. He's co-editor with Miriam Pemberton of Lessons from Iraq, Avoiding the Next War. He's the author of Prophets of War, Lockheed Martin and the Making of the Military-Industrial Complex, and co-author with Freeman of The $1 Trillion War Machine. Welcome, Bill and Ben, to Freeform, a World That Just Might Work.
Yes, glad to be here.
Great.
Pleasure to be with you.
So, first voice you heard was Bill. The second voice you heard was Ben. Let me tell people we're recording this conversation Thursday, February 26th. And I like listeners to get a feel for the people behind the work and the ideas that we talk about. So I'm going to ask each of you to tell us in your words how you see your path to the work you do today. And you can go way back, childhood inspirations, mentors, turning points, that sort of thing. And let's start with Bill.
Yes, because it's a longer path.
That's right.
Ben is a geriatric millennial. I'm just geriatric. Well, I grew up in a small town, Lakeview, New York, which was rock rib Republican. My dad was a Barry Goldwater supporter. And I thought, well, it was locked down, like I wanted to be a referee in the town recreation league. I had to give to the Republican picnic. It was a huge, huge scandal. And but also I was surrounded by all that. So we had a mock presidential debate in 1968 at school, and I played Richard Nixon because he said he had a plan to end the war. And what did I know, And it was not a political school. We used to have fire drills where you go out in the parking lot, and people wouldn't want to go back to class, so they'd say, hell no, we won't go. I swear half of them didn't know that was an anti-war slogan. It was just like, I don't want to go inside, So I kind of got past that. There was a push factor, which is my dad and I didn't get along. And I wanted to be as different from him as possible. It's not really like a plan. It's just an emotion. But I did get away, and I went to Columbia University because I was going to be a student radical, damn it. And it was 1973. Most of that was over with. And our big demand was no tuition increases, which is not a global issue. Maybe, but not a big one. But then
let me just cut in for 1 second, Bill, just to give you my place in that chronology. I began college in 65 and graduated 69 from Harvard. So I actually hit the peak just before, right? 69 was the year of the strike and all of that. 70 then was Kent State, and you sadly don't get there till 73.
You were the person I wanted to be. Yeah. And so we had to work harder to get attention, but then the divestment campaign in South Africa started to get up some steam. And frankly, that's how I ended up doing what I'm doing, because I did research on the university's portfolio, and then I joined a collective that outside of the university that put out a magazine called Southern Africa, which was supporting the liberation movements and covering the anti-apartheid movement here and there. And my beat was who's violating the arms embargo, which multinationals are propping up the regime. And I was also part of something called the Committee to Oppose Bank Loans to South Africa. and a friend of mine, Tina Simsich, did this handbook that showed you all the banks. The problem was we were in New York, so you didn't know who to boycott. I mean, everybody was banks that don't exist anymore. Manufacturers, Hanover, Chemical Bank. We were going to chain ourselves to a bank. We couldn't decide which one to do it to. Um, but anyway, this was other than there was one piece of Columbia that helped, which is I took a class with Seymour Melman, who had a book called The Permanent War Economy of the United States. And he came from an engineering background, and he said, the Pentagon will spend anything. They don't care about cost, and they're ruining our engineers. Like they can't design for the market anymore. That's why Japan and Germany are crushing us. And he was hard to really describe, but he was kind of like almost a anarcho-syndicalist or something in a weird guise. But basically, his idea was the government needs an investment strategy to replace the money you would take out of the Pentagon. You need these committees at each company with labor, community. So it was planning, and that was not, in America, you're only planning to like enrich yourself, not to improve the country. That's allowed. So anyway, so that was how I got into it. And then I was supposed to go to law school. I decided not to, and I had no real employment prospects. But there's a guy named Gordon Adams, now Abby Ross, who had a project at a think tank called the Council on Economic Priorities. And so anyway, they took pity on me, and it was a different world. We just did a round of intern applications, and we had 400 applicants for the job that Gordon was pushing. One person turned it down, my friend, because it didn't pay enough, 7,000 a year. I lived in this like rickety walk up. My share of the rent was $100. I could in fact afford to work for $7,000 a year. And it was like going to graduate school and getting paid because I learned how to write reports, do primary research, radio interviews. It was my training ground. I was there for 6 years. And then I got tired of raising money. I worked as a speechwriter for Bob Abrams, New York State Attorney General. But during Iran-Contra, I started writing a book about the arms trade. And when it came out, I didn't want to be a speechwriter for the New York State Attorney General. I wanted to be, traveling around the country. So I got a job at a place called the World Policy Institute, position funded by the Plowshares Fund. And I figured that'd be good for a few years because, foundations are fickle. But I've basically been doing that ever since. And it's kind of a privileged position to, opine on the military industrial complex and get paid for it. Be even better position if we were winning, but there's
That's
time.
right. It would be a better position if you didn't have to do it.
Well, I have a neighbor who every time he bumps into me says, "Well, Bill, if peace breaks out, you're out of a job." I'm like, I have other skills. I can figure it out. But anyway, it's been a long haul, and if I wasn't so stubborn, I'd probably be a bad banker or something at this point.
Yeah. Well, one thing that I found interesting in that, Bill, was that your window into weapons companies, defense budgets, all of that was not a direct one. It was about apartheid, and it just happened. It was almost a bank shot, right?
Yeah, well, but when I applied for this job, it was my only relevant experience. And I was very curious about the other things these companies did. So I thrived in that sense. And the place was about corporate social responsibility, which was like the weak version would be like you tell the companies they're doing bad stuff and they stop, which of course is not how it works. It would be great, wouldn't it? So, but because it was about researching corporations and their misdeeds, all these progressive young researchers were flocking to this place. And I ended up writing a thing about the benefits of a nuclear freeze and the economic special interest roots of Star Wars, and it sort of became my specialty is the politics of all this.
Yeah.
And not everybody has that luxury to like dig into that wonderfully exciting and inspiring subject. So
this is the first time that you and I have met, even virtually. The first time that I've had you on the program, but I've certainly been reading you for many years.
well, it's easy to remember because I say the same thing until they listen to me. So. Well, when we have staff meetings, Ben's like, Bill's going to finish an op-ed before the end of this meeting. And I don't put it past me.
Yeah.
Okay. Not this podcast, though.
Okay, Ben, your path.
I will. I'll be shorter because, as Bill says, I'm just a geriatric millennial. I've got a shorter story than him. But mine begins. I was born and raised in Florida, and my mother, the
Where?
family
I
business.
grew up in Florida too. We're
Oh, really? Yeah, up in I'm in Northeast Florida, a small town called Flagler Beach.
okay. I lived 5 years in Miami, first grade to sixth grade, then Jacksonville for 5 years,
Yeah,
and so at that point I'm near Flagler Beach,
you're right
and
there. Yeah.
and then I did my last 2 years of high school in Cocoa.
Oh, wonderful. Growing up in Florida, the family business, which was I literally grew up under my mom's business, which was selling seashells by the seashore. And no, her name's not Sally. To all the listeners out there. But you know, I came from this business background. You know, both my parents are small business owners, and I was going to college for business administration. And this was, I'll date myself to let you know how much, what a geriatric millennial actually means when they go to college. I was in college when 9/11 happened, and then when the Iraq War happened. And I had the very unpopular opinion in Florida, certainly at the time, maybe across the nation at the time, that the Iraq War was a horrible idea, and I just couldn't stop talking about it, and I got involved in anti-war protests and activism. And I, you know, the refrain I would often get from my friends is like, you know, what the heck do you know? You know, you're a business guy. You're a seashell seller. You know, you don't know anything about like foreign affairs. Like, just shut up. You know, go back to the shells, man. And so I basically did the Florida man equivalent of hold my beer and watch this. And I went to grad school for 7 years to figure out what the heck was going on with this whole foreign policy establishment. Got a master's at the University of Central Florida, and then got a PhD at Texas A&M. And you know, have been writing, investigating for the foreign policy industry ever since. I wrote my dissertation on the foreign lobbying industry, which you mentioned, Terrence, and that led me into a wonderful organization called the Project on Government Oversight in DC. And I remember very much like Bill's story, my experience at Pogo. You know, the job ad was like, "Do you want to go up against the largest bureaucracy in the world? Do you want to stamp out corruption?" And I'm like, "Yes, I do. I want to do all those things. Let's do it." And so, you know, I applied for the job, and they're like, "All right, Ben, we love you. But we can only pay you $35,000 a year. It's not seven, but in DC in this was 2010. DC in 2010, $35,000 a year was not a living wage, but I was still like, you know what? I'll take it. Like, let's go. Let's do this thing. And I'm so glad I did. It was one of those pivotal moments for me because I ended up at the wonderful people at the Project on Government Oversight. They let you talk to military whistleblowers. They let you investigate all the things that Bill and I talk about in the book. Overpriced defense contractors. I spoke with whistleblowers on the Littoral Combat Ship program, which we have a lot of content of in the book. You know, I kind of learned the ins and outs of the money and politics industry, and that was actually the first time I ever met Bill. Was when I was at Pogo, and it was actually on a tour, a book speaking gig for his book Prophets of War. And Bill, I'll never forget this moment to this day. I don't know if I've ever told this to Bill, but Bill looks out in the audience. It's a DC venue, and somebody at the end of the talk, Bill's done an excellent talk, and somebody says, "Well, Bill, how are you going to fix all this?" Exactly what you were asking, Terrence. And Terrence, without missing a blink, he looks out in the crowd. He picks out me and my boss, Nick Schwellenbach, and he's like, "Oh, I got my friends at Pogo here. They're the ones that are in charge of exploring solutions. They'll fix it all. I just write the books." So from then on, I was like, man, this is a good guy. I got to keep working with him. We started working together at the Center for International Policy. We took our dream team over to the Quincy Institute a few years ago, and we hatched the idea for this book. Actually, Bill was on vacation back down here in Florida, and we like to say that this book ruined a perfectly good day on the boat in Florida. One of my good friends had taken us out on his boat very nicely, and it was just a beautiful day. You know, the dolphins are jumping. You know, everything is just like bright sun in the sky. And Bill's all boohooing. He's like, you know, my publisher's coming back. You know, they want me to write this book. You know, I don't know. You know, it seems hard. He's like, what do you think? You know, what should we do? And I was just like, Bill, I got an idea. I've written an outline for, I had not told Bill this whatsoever. I was like, I've actually written down an outline for a book that I think you and I should write together. And so from there, Bill and I, of course, massaged it, all sorts of edits, we did all kinds of stuff. But the original idea for this book was hatched on a boat in the great state of Florida.
Great. Funny story. Let me ask you, you mentioned, Ben, that you took your dream team over to Quincy. Tell me just a little bit about Quincy. As I said, I've had Andrew Basovich on several times, actually. So I followed sort of the thing, but from the inside, what attracted you there? And what does it feel like there these days? And I'll bounce over to Bill and then we come back to Ben if you want.
Yeah, I mean, we like to say that the Quincy Institute is a think tank for people who don't like think tanks, and that's what really attracted us to it. So many think tanks out there. Well, number one, they're dominated by Pentagon contractor funding, or funding by a lot of these foreign governments that like to keep the U.S. embroiled in foreign wars. And so they're captured effectively. So many of these think tanks, you can't say the truth. You certainly can't say the truth that Bill Hartung and I do. And so the Quincy Institute is one of the very few places in the world where you can say that, and they are actively pursuing a more peaceful, a more restrained U.S. foreign policy. Which I think Bill and I and everybody else at the Quincy Institute believes is a much better foreign policy for Americans and for the world. So the mission was right there. And I think it was, when Bill and I came in, it was a few years ago. Quincy Institute's only been around since 2019. And, Bill and I just came in, I think at the very beginning of 2023. And so, we got it, not quite on the ground floor, but, maybe on the second floor, we were right there. And so we were still kind of carving out what the organization was going to be. We had just started this wonderful program that I'm now the director of with the Democratizing Foreign Policy initiative. And so it gave us the opportunity to do this wonderful work that we do, but being surrounded by a huge organization. Well, not huge, there's only like 40 of us, but with a lot of other like-minded folks who are all moving in the exact same direction and who come from different ideological spaces. As you mentioned, we had the Soros funding, we had the Charles Koch funding. I like to joke about this. I was like, if you've got a boogeyman, chances are they fund us. But we love it because we're nonpartisan. We like to call it transpartisan. If you're somebody that's in favor of a more peaceful U.S. foreign policy, whether you call yourself a Republican, a Democrat, a Libertarian, a Green Party member, whatever you want to call yourself, if you want a more peaceful, more restrained foreign policy, the Quincy Institute's for you. And I like that big umbrella approach that Quincy provides. It really lets us.
One of the things I used to say about Andrew, because it was true, was that he was one of the few people that I had on my show who wrote for both the American Conservative and The Nation.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's right.
Which is, Bill, any thoughts about Quincy?
Well, I mean, the fact that Ben and I came together was like a dream. It was like a baseball trade. Like either you take both of us or this isn't happening.
Hey,
I mean,
look, the Clippers got ruined by that when they had to take Paul George to get Kawhi Leonard.
Oh God, the Clippers used to be the Buffalo Braves.
That's right.
I was in Buffalo. Usually, places that I work for go out of business. Quincy will not, mostly because of Ben, who is like a rock star, and also when my head explodes, he puts it back together.
Good.
So I can be coherent,
nice.
And we're a good team. Like, if we write an essay, we do an outline, we swap sections, we did the book that way, but of course the book is harder. But it kind of worked. And Ben knows everybody on earth. I know a couple of people, and all meshed together. I have historical content by virtue of being old. And it's the easiest book I wrote. And I think it reads well, and I think we learn some things. And unfortunately, the moment is ripe. I mean, usually my first book, the only reason that they signed it up was because the invasion of Iraq, and I had a chapter on who armed Saddam, and they called me the next day and said, "Wow, this is fresh. Did you rewrite this or something?" So there is that perverse notion that if people don't pay attention until things are pretty bad, but the advantage of the book is we sort of talk about how actually these processes are not episodic; they're embedded. And
This is
and we took a much broader look of it's sort of like, there's soft power for diplomacy, there's soft power for influence. So it's not just the campaign contributions and the jobs, it's Hollywood and the gaming industry and sports. And I think that people had spoken to that, but not brought it together in one place. And Ben knows things I don't. Like, I've seen half a Marvel movie because I was bored on a road trip. He actually knows what it is. So like he can help explain all that. I'm in uh, Montana and I don't sleep well. So I was talking to the clerk in the middle of the night, who's a huge gamer. He's explaining all the games to me and how they work and what are the best ones. I'm like, I probably should have talked to you before we wrote the book. Thank God Ben is my colleague. But and he was a Trumper, but no more. And he's a populist. And it's I think there's a lot of that actually. There's people who supported Trump because they don't trust corporations, the system's rigged, Democrats disappointed them. I think some of them are reachable. I don't know about the man himself because he's a different animal. But some of the stuff in the book about him going after the warmongers is a message to that part of his base that is not tied into this kind of militarist policy. So that to me is hopeful. And I'm on a mini speaking tour for the book, and there's a lot of receptiveness across the spectrum. People that even, like people who didn't know each other came to my event. They were working on parallel issues in their own town, and this take on it kind of brought them together in interesting ways.
No, I think it's so true. I mean, he has to tell them one thing and hope they don't look at what he's actually doing. To
Right.
keep it rolling. I had written down, although to some extent it may not be need to be, this question may not need to be answered, but if either of you says, wait a minute, I got a good one for that. It's that notion that we have in terms of conversation. I think I'm very glad when I think before I speak and I ask myself, does this need to be said? Does it need to be said now? And does it need to be said by me? Right? If I look back on the times I actually remembered to think that, I'm usually happy that I did. Yeah. And it struck me that applies to every book. Why does it need to be said? Does it need to be said now? And does it need to be said by you guys? And I think in some sense, what you've already said sort of answers that. But if you want to throw in anything else about the now or the why you guys, go right ahead.
Well, I have to thank Ben for talking me into it because my original idea was, oh, come on. I've been writing about this my whole life. The world's going to hell in a handbasket. I don't have time to write a book. And I want to write something else or poetry or something, which would have been a disaster.
I look forward to that poetry book. And I just got in there. Cool. Can't wait for that HARTUNG series of poetry.
Indeed.
By the way, one of my recent conversations was George Packer, who, I don't know if you know this, but he's been writing about foreign policy and war and all of that and what's wrong with American cities and blah blah blah. And his latest book is a novel.
Oh yeah.
He said I felt like I just kept saying the same facts, and it didn't make any difference. And I thought maybe I can get into their consciousness through fiction instead. So it's
The fact checker on my last book accused me of writing a novel, but but anyway, what happened was Ben was absolutely right. Not only that we should do it, but we learned things, and I think actually the complex changed while we were writing the book because the tech bros and their imitators, I think, really surged during that period when we were digging in, and if it hadn't been for doing the book, I don't think we'd have as clear an idea what we're up against in this new dynamic, which is going to be historic for good or ill,
Yeah. I would just add to that too, Terrence. I think that's a good question, and it's something that your flow there is something I do as well. Like I've got a good idea, and that's actually where this outline for this started. As I mentioned, the outline that I had drummed up was something I wanted Bill to write. I didn't want, I thought he was the right voice for this. But no, it did start to make sense that the more we talked about it, that our sort of powers combined. Because my sort of shtick, following the money in politics, working with the military whistleblowers, and having the foreign influence industry being a kind of partner in crime to the military industrial complex, combining that with Bill's just unrivaled expertise in covering the MIC for decades, I think that's what, together led us to say, let's write this together. This book will be better, even better than the sum of its parts here. And another justification for me for writing it, because Bill and I both, this is not our first rodeo. Writing books is hard, and at times it really sucks. And so, to any listeners out there, thinking about like going through the process of writing a book, think real hard, because I can't remember the exact numbers, but it's something like 1 in 5, or it might be 1 in 10 books that people start writing, only 1 in 10 get finished. And so you're going to put in a lot of work, and it's never going to see the light of day, unfortunately. So you better have a good answer to your question there, Terrence. And I think for us, the answer was, we had done so much work in this space. Bill's last book, Profits of War, is about the making of the military-industrial complex. So, he's already one of the leading experts in this field. But what really led us to think, not just that we wanted to write this book, that we had to write this book, was because nobody had put all of the pieces together yet. Nobody had put, as you mentioned in the beginning, nobody had put together that, hey, there's things, it's not just the lobbyists. Eisenhower was right. That iron triangle is going crazy. The lobbyists, campaign contributions, all that's still going nuts. But, as Bill mentioned, we've got the gaming industry. We've got the think tank industry. We got sports washing now. We got academia. We got the media. Wherever you are now, the military industrial complex is there. You are immersed in the military industrial complex. And we were not aware of a book that put all those pieces together. And so we felt like we had to do that, and we had to give people the $1 trillion war machine so they would know. It's kind of, I use the metaphor very often of like the movie The Matrix. Like, we had to take people, behind the scenes, lift the veil from their eyes so they could see just how pervasive the MIC is today.
Yeah, no, one thing, as I was even beginning to wade into this, was that all those other enablers, it was a surprise, like, oh, how can they say sports, or how, it was, yeah. But as you say, I hadn't seen anyone else, and I hadn't myself I'd seen, an article here about the NFL, or an article here about academia, that sort of thing. But kind of the way in which it has, it's like sort of the Last of Us, right? That fungus that just
just weaves in.
Grows, and suddenly it's everywhere, and it's lethal. Let me tell people, this is Freeform, a world that just might work. I'm Terrence McNally. I'm speaking with Bill Hartung and Ben Freeman about their new book, The $1 Trillion War Machine: How Runaway Military Spending Drives America into Foreign Wars and Bankrupts Us at Home. You can learn more about both of them at the website of the Quincy Institute, and that is QUINCY-INST.org. Let me have a quick answer from either one of you about just that assertion that you make and that I made in the intro, how much worse things are than when Ike warned us against the military-industrial complex. Just a little something that sort of brings to people's view how much worse. And people probably think it's like as bad as it's ever been, but it's worse.
Well, Ben should do it, because I'll say it reminds him of a story I talked for an hour and a half. So,
okay.
I was going to say you should go first because you're closer to Eisenhower's time, man.
Yeah, no, actually, he used to babysit me when he was down on his luck. And well, my mom did have an Ike pin, which was very nice, like zirconium or something.
The I like Ike.
Yeah.
Nice.
Well, either way, Ben, you go, I go. We're both,
Yeah.
Yeah, it's metastasized. I think beyond Ike's worst nightmares. When he makes that speech, defense contracting is kind of an afterthought, and it's a molehill compared to what we have now. Bill actually just put out about a year ago now with our wonderful colleague Stephen Simler a report and found that more than half the Pentagon's budget, 54%, is going to contractors now. In Ike's time, you still had MASH could be a show on TV. I'm dating myself by even making a MASH reference. But you're talking about active duty service personnel actually cooking their meals and cleaning up after them, and doing the things a lot of service members used to do. So much of that now is contracted out, and so from Ike's time to today, it is Ike's worst nightmare on steroids.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, a few of the things that you point out, that I know have grown enormously since Ike's time is a whole portion of defense spending that doesn't even. I realize as I'm saying this, I'm not sure. I don't think this shows up in the defense budget, but all the weapons that we sell to Israel, to Europe, all over the world, that's pure profit for the defense contractors. But does that show up anywhere in the defense? No. So that is all in it. That's money for them in addition to this $1 trillion defense budget.
I mean, even if we give them aid, usually it's aid under the authorization of the State Department. So, and of course you got their Saudis who pay, and aid to Israel is aid to Lockheed Martin because it's just coming right back to them. But anyway, yeah, it's kind of remarkable. And we did learn a ton. One thing we learned was that they actually had to do research about, because like who's going to fill out the armed forces? All these kids are slackers and gamers. And they did a study after 9/11 said that's good because they're multitaskers and they can run the new automated military, and they actually consult gamers of how to design the drone controls. And the Army has a gaming team that competes with civilians. That's a big recruiting thing. They've done research about robots are your friend. Like a lot of the people in the service, like, I don't like this. I'm not comfortable with this. So they actually had to kind of shape the minds of the workforce and the recruits to get them to warm up to this. And they've also got a pipeline into Silicon Valley from ex-military folks, because there was these pesky people who said maybe, we shouldn't be helping drone targeting. And they had won some victories, which then were rolled back. So yeah, there was a lot there I wasn't aware of. And being an expert on Lockheed Martin now is like being an expert on the Dutch East India Company. Doesn't
right, or Kodak, right?
Does not get you your 3 seconds of glory on CNN,
Yeah. So I think the two big things I want to make sure we talk about is the that massively expanded complex, the enablers that I talked about, and the move into of new tech into defense, which I think in some ways are, if you were to say, so what are the two big new things in your book? I think those are it. So let's talk about the enablers, and let me just throw each one out and get your pitch on it. So I think what we think is that the politicians and the lobbyists have always been around. That was what Ike's military industrial complex included. That was one of the legs of that stool. But so we're going to talk about the other ones. So Hollywood. Who wants to talk about Hollywood?
Oh, me.
Oh, yeah.
I'd love to talk about Hollywood, because this was really eye-opening for us. Like to Bill's point, you learn a lot when you write a book, and this was one of the sections. For me, I think we had to do the most research on going into it. We had done a lot of work in a lot of other parts of this book, but this was an area we had to learn, but we knew it was really important. But what we learned when we dug into Hollywood was that it's shocking that we didn't know this already. Two people who make a living, investigating foreign policy, investigating the military-industrial complex, money in politics, the influence game, everything. We didn't know just how pervasive the military-industrial complex's influence is in Hollywood. And what we found through the wonderful work of some other folks is that Hollywood, the Pentagon, has been involved in more than 2,500 Hollywood movies and TV shows. Everything from some of the biggest blockbusters you can think of, like Bill mentioned the Marvel franchise. Almost every single movie in the Marvel franchise was produced in collaboration with the Pentagon. In the $1 Trillion War Machine, we highlight Captain Marvel, and we really dug into that and talked to some folks about that movie. And if you watch that movie, which I love, by the way, to Bill's point, I love the Marvel. I was a comic book kid growing up, so like, seeing all these guys and girls come to life is amazing for me. I'd go to the theater and I'd check them out. But if you do take a careful look at Captain Marvel, you realize really quick that this is a 2-hour Air Force recruiting ad. And the Air Force backed it up. They were unabashed about it. That recruiting did go up after the movie aired, particularly female recruitment. The head of it is a female actress. And so they're very, very successful in their collaborations with them. But those collaborations come with a cost, we learned. And so the Pentagon's Entertainment Liaison Office, they're the ones who vet these scripts. And so if you want to work with the Pentagon, if you want to create a Top Gun where you need some aircraft carriers, you need some actual fighter jets, you need all this fancy hardware, that doesn't come for, there's no such thing as a free lunch. You've got to submit your script to the Entertainment Liaison Office. And that gives the Entertainment Liaison Office a big opportunity to engage in a massive amount of censorship. And so they can censor you right away and just say, if you come in with a script that's too hard, one producer that we talked to said, it's effectively, there's a self-censorship mechanism going on where if you're a producer, you don't go to the Entertainment Liaison Office with a script that's too critical of the military because they'll shoot it down. And if they shoot you down and you're making a war movie, you're not going to get that movie made. The movie industry is just cutthroat right now. So if they shoot you down, you're done. So what producers do, they placate them to begin with. So self-censorship happens. But even after that, the Pentagon, through FOIA requests, we found that the Pentagon is literally making line edits in scripts, changing outright scenes, changing the end of movies. We talk about the movie creation of the famous George Orwell book, 1984. In a very Orwellian twist, the Pentagon changed the end of 1984, the movie. Yeah, so it's just a pervasive system that really nobody knows about. But chances are, if you're watching any sort of big military movie, TV show, documentary, the Pentagon was involved.
I think Top Gun, that's obvious, right? It's about the military. Okay, but what you're saying is all those superhero movies are actually military movies, and they get a say.
Right. That's exactly right. And so, you can look at some, as we did with Captain Marvel, you can look at some of them like that and just see how, like, oh, this is really over the top, a very pro Air Force movie. Other ones, and another big one for your listeners might be familiar with, is the Fast and the Furious franchise. There's like a dozen of these movies now, there's a ton of them. And they've got these fancy cars and everything. But as they sort of progressed along, they went into this kind of like militarized, military equipment was showing up. And there's just outright ads for some of the military equipment. And one of the movies, one of the main characters basically goes through like a 2-minute ad for this fancy combat vehicle called the Ripsaw. And he's laying out stats, the horsepower of it and everything. And you're like in the middle of a movie and you're like, well, how did I just get involved in the middle of a Pentagon contractor ad?
Right.
Well,
but that was what, Bill?
If your weapon is a dog in real life, it's flawless in the movies.
Oh, right.
But it's true. It's a limit. Like they didn't, vet When Harry Met Sally. There are some parameters, but so many films and all these TV shows that are military intelligence. So it's a steady drumbeat.
Right. And yeah. So, and I'm going to let you, Ben, also talk briefly about gaming, which seems to me to be, the same thing, only a narrower lane almost.
Right. One thing to close out the militainment, the Hollywood thing.
Sure.
I highly recommend to your listeners a guy named Roger Stahl. He is the guy when it comes to uncovering, unmasking the militainment industry. He's a wonderful documentary that he's produced called Theaters of War. Check that out if you guys get a chance.
Great.
Crossing over to the game.
Stahl, Stahl?
Stahl. Yeah.
Great.
He's out of the University of Georgia. He is the guy in the space. Just a brilliant man. In the gaming industry, what we found in this space was the gaming industry. The gaming industry is actually bigger than Hollywood now. By dollars and cents, this is an absurdly large industry. And so, there's outright collaboration with the Pentagon on some of these games. But really, the bread and butter for the Pentagon in the gaming industry is exactly like Bill said. It's a recruitment tool. So all of the services now, they all have gaming things. It's not just the Army. The Air Force has one. The Navy has one. They're specifically putting these gaming teams together as a recruitment device because as the military gets more technologically advanced, they need fewer Rambos and more nerds who know how to operate drones, know how to operate a lot of this technologically advanced equipment. So where do you find those folks? Gaming,
Now,
gaming
when you say
competition.
gaming teams, do you mean a bunch of people within a military service that that work on gaming, or do you mean a gaming team like the Army's team, the Air Force's team that competes in the gaming world, or do you mean both?
Competes. Yeah,
Yeah.
the latter.
So that competes.
They
Yeah.
compete. Yeah.
That is wild.
An esports team. Yeah. And they, early on, they said when they used this stuff for simulation and training, and the gaming industry actually was advancing. Their graphics were better. So they were buying it back, and they hired a guy from Disney Imagineering to help them figure it out. And basically, one of the guys in the book says, yeah, the military has to be more like Disney. So it was all much earlier than I realized, certainly.
Okay. Sports.
Sports is pervasive too. I think it kind of flies under the radar for most of us. I'm a sports fanatic. I would tell
Me
you
too.
I'm a Florida guy. I've let my colors show. I'm a Florida Gator through and through, and I love it. Every game though, there's a military flyover. There's a salute to service, and we love it. The planes fly over. You're like, great.
That's right. I can remember when it was, well, I hadn't asked myself why we sing the national anthem before every game, but that was about it.
Right.
They'd sing
Right.
the national anthem. Maybe they'd have the color guard, right?
Right.
But as you say, it's the flyovers, it's the wearing fatigue colored uniforms, all of that sort of thing.
Right. And it's gotten so much, I think, again, going back to Ike, it's gotten so much more robust than during Ike's time. You now have outright Pentagon contractor sponsorship of sports teams. Just this past season, the Ohio State Buckeyes, one of their primary sponsors was Anduril, one of the biggest up and comers in the defense tech space. So when you looked at the billboard and at the Ohio State, at the Buckeye Stadium, you were looking at an Anduril logo right there too. And so again, wherever you go, there's this influence going on there. And what they don't tell you about those flyovers too is that it's really expensive to fly military aircraft. So some of the aircraft that we're flying, the cost per flight hour is in the tens of thousands of dollars. So whenever you see aircraft in formation, you're talking about 50 to maybe over $100,000. I flew with the Air Force Thunderbirds, which I talk about a little bit in the book, and then I didn't learn about it. It was a wonderful experience. Just an incredible team of folks there. But when you start adding up the numbers of just how much goes in to the Air Force Thunderbirds, I got to see it behind the scenes. It is just like a walking, talking, traveling around the country recruitment tool. And it's very expensive. There's over 100 people that are involved in that Thunderbirds program. It's not just the planes you see in the sky are just the tip of the spear. And, some of the people who are involved in that, they're outright military recruiters. So as the planes are going up in the sky, we're all going rah, 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 rah. Our sons and daughters are going to the recruiting table and they're signing up right there. And so I think there's a ground to be had in the middle. You can love that flyover. I love flying in the Thunderbirds. I'll never say otherwise. But you have to recognize what the purpose of that is. And, if the purpose of that is this tool of militarism, you can have both those thoughts in your head at the same time.
Okay, Bill, let me go to you for think tanks and academia. Now, let me see if I can dispense with think tanks pretty quickly. It didn't surprise me at all that think tanks are doing this. My guess is that it's grown over the years, but that's not something that would surprise people so much. But the influence and the thumb on the scales and the footprint in academia, I think, would surprise people.
Well, it's interesting because, of course, the concern about Gaza led to students looking at universities investing in companies that were arming Israel. But the deeper issue is those universities are doing military research. It's not just their investments, it's the campuses themselves. If you go on the quad at Berkeley and you told a student that their university helps run a nuclear weapons lab, they would be surprised. Even Johns Hopkins, which gets $1 billion a year to do things like ballistic missile research, their laboratory that does that is 40 miles from campus. So it's just kind of it's just there. But now these students are starting to look into this, and they're realizing that these ties are very deep. And as Michael Clare, my colleague and one of my mentors, pointed out, because of this work, towards AI and emerging tech, the talent they need to develop that is on university campuses. It's not at Lockheed Martin. It's not at Boeing. So they're putting on a strong press. And some of the students are conflicted. Some of them are like, well, that's good. It's patriotic, next generation defense. Some, I'd rather be doing something else, but it's interesting work. I'm going to get paid. Some are protesting it. But a lot of campuses, there's a split. The liberal arts students are protesting, and the engineers are saying, yeah, we love these folks. But there are engineers who are conflicted or would rather be doing something else. But nonetheless, it's kind of a heyday of investing in military research at universities, to the point where Howard University got its first big military research contract, and they're reaching out to the historically Black colleges and universities. And people usually think, oh, it's MIT, it's Stanford, a few other places. It's everywhere. And it is a conflict for engineers coming up about if that's the kind of work they want to do, but they're not been given a lot of choices. And some of the work is, and on the face of it, it's not clear immediately that it has military applications, so you can sort of put it aside. But nonetheless, it's shaping the kind of the problems that our most talented technical people are focusing on, to the neglect of others.
I mean, I would add to that Bill and I have been spending a lot of time on campuses lately since the book came out, and some before, and talking to folks about this. And one thing we hear over and over again is from the students themselves, who say, "What do we do? We're about to graduate. We want jobs, and all the jobs are on the other side." And they're feeling it. You get recruiters for these companies, as Bill mentioning, they're coming to campus. They're already collaborating with the universities, and so it's kind of they're pushing on an open door to get in front of these students, and the students are feeling it. At the end of our talks, the students are very inspired, or at least they lie well to us, and they tell us they're inspired, at least. But they're earnestly wanting to know what opportunities are available to them in this space, because they're getting inundated on campuses with opportunities to go into the military industrial complex.
Right. And as you say, there's two motivations, at least, leaving patriotism aside. And one is, I need a job. And the other is, wow, they've got the interesting work.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
Now, and Lockheed Martin actually has Lockheed Martin Days at about a dozen campuses. And some places they actually land a helicopter in the quad. They offer little joy rides. You get internships. But there's also people who, of course, protest those Lockheed Martin Days. And we have colleagues who were at University of Texas at Austin who ran a divestment campaign on Lockheed Martin, then went on to do research in this field. And the engineering students were like, no, we want that relationship. This is good for us. This is opportunity. But those students did an alternative portfolio that showed they could earn more money not investing in these places. They were very professionally done. So I'm very impressed with the skills and the research that some of the students are now doing, and they're linking back to people like Michael Clare or groups that worked in the 60s or my era, and we're learning from each other. What I've learned is that they are better researchers than I am. I mean, like they figured out, like, there's spare parts going to Israel by FedEx from the San Francisco airport. I didn't know that. There's a huge warehouse in Jersey that's a logistics point for sending spare parts to Israel also, because they used different sources. Like they were tracking, I don't know, FedEx stuff and shipping, and they're more facile at, using the various databases. And so, like, they come to me, and all I can say is, "You're doing a great job. How do we get this information to more people?"
Right.
So that's really my role, is just elevating that work. But they know how to do the research, and they're very good at it.
So this bleeds right into that other big thing I want to talk about, which is the emergence, the enormous expansion of big tech, Silicon Valley, into this sphere, and the competition, the rivalry, what's going on between the legacy companies. And let me see, let me just lay out for people who don't know. This is from your work. The Pentagon's discretionary budget rose from 570 billion in 2000 to 843 billion in 2025, a 66% increase. But what it is from 2020 to 2024, 771 billion in Pentagon contracts went to just 5 firms: Lockheed Martin, RTX, formerly Raytheon, Boeing, General Dynamics, and Northrop Grumman. So had we been doing this a few years ago, it would be all about them. But talk about this emerging competition and what's happening and what you fear.
Bill,
Bill,
tackle it.
Yes.
Bill was our poobah on all this.
I'll rant and Ben will correct. So the thing is, well, the first thing I'll say is there's some wonderful trash talking going on. Anduril, who's run by Palmer Luckey, the gamer who decided to get into weapons, has this sort of manifesto, rebooting the arsenal of democracy. And a lot of it we would agree with. In fact, we're footnoted in it. And basically, it's about how the legacy firms had their day. They defended us during the Cold War, they're patriots. But let's face it, it's a new era, new weapons, new business practices, new software. It's time for them to accept their Lifetime Achievement Award and get out of the way. So Palmer Luckey can make not only weapons, but our global policy, which is a nightmare scenario. So there was that. And, Peter Thiel was kind of the godfather of it all. He got a contract from the CIA's venture capital fund after 9/11. They said, we had all this information. We couldn't, sort through it. And Thiel said, I'll do that. That's my skill. And then he encouraged people like Palmer Luckey to get into the military. He's got a venture capital arm. He employed J.D. Vance and then helped fund his Senate campaign. When J.D. Vance became VP, that's when the money really started pumping out of Silicon Valley from Musk and others. So it's a different world. There was a moment when they were making enough on the commercial side. They didn't care so much. Pentagon was a hassle to deal with. There was a spirit among many of the workers who didn't want to make weapons. But this new generation of leadership, these kind of extreme libertarians who think like, an algorithm can do a better job than the government, are in ascendancy, at least at the top levels of the industry. And they're very much, they made a bet on Trump and the Republicans. The old companies, usually they go about 60-40 in their contributions, 60% to who's in power now, 40% to who isn't. The lobbying firms have one Republican, one Democrat. Now it's just like, the reason they like Trump because they think he's going to take a wrecking ball to all those regulations, and they'll be free to move quickly and disrupt and so forth, as opposed to the old system where the paperwork alone was so onerous, the small firms couldn't make it. But then when you had these firms run by billionaires, they could hang in there. In the old days, like an innovative company, Lockheed Martin would just buy it, or they couldn't weave through the regs. And when they got both SpaceX and Palantir, when they got their first Pentagon contracts, they had to sue and say the process was unfair and get a rebid. So you needed these billionaires to be in a position to even challenge these folks. And so now, are they really going to challenge them? Are they going to just make sure there's enough money for everybody? That's the question on the table. The other being, say they supplant Lockheed Martin. What kind of world do they want to see? I mean, it's not just technology. It's how do you relate to the rest of the world? So Palmer Luckey going on TV and saying, oh, yeah, we could beat China in a war, and 8 years in, we'd still have ammunition. Well, I don't think there's going to be an 8-year war with a nuclear armed power. But he's actually not trained as a geopolitical analyst. He's a gamer. And it's almost as if he sees this as just an extension of that. And then you've got things like, Peter Thiel wants to live forever, and Musk wants to do mass colonization of space. They've done some amazing technical feats, but somehow they think it means they can do almost anything, and also that they are a superior form of human being because they call themselves founders, and they're the only ones who can restore American dominance. And they're so patriotic that they need $1 trillion just to go along with it. This
Yeah,
is
no, I've found myself thinking that one of the reasons that they are interested in space travel is that the problem with this place is all the other people.
yeah, exactly. This live forever is not for everybody.
Right.
It's like people who got their kids into college by bribing. Like if you want to get live forever, you got to know somebody. But
Yeah. No, I
frankly,
mean,
Right.
their whole view, it seems to me, is we are superior beings, and everything that sort of is on the side of the equation for most of humans is kind of irrelevant. We won't have to deal with that. We'll isolate ourselves from
right,
that. But when you start doing that with things like weapons and war, and the whole idea of the more technically advanced the weaponry gets, the more it's dependent on AI, the more likely you will be able to inflict damage without losing death on your side, which, as you guys point out, makes war all the more likely.
right. Even living forever. If I had to live forever sitting next to Peter Thiel, that would be my idea of hell, you know. But
Absolutely.
that's because I'm a cranky 70-year-old and not a geriatric millennial. I'm not as
Right.
resilient.
Right.
I,
One thing that you mentioned in your answer, Bill, was I've long said that the biggest industry players fight regulations until they are inevitable. Then they help write the regulations. So smaller
Yes,
companies can't compete. I first started seeing this in environmental issues,
exactly. Yeah.
waste management, right? They would oppose, and then when it becomes inevitable that we're changing the rules around landfills, they write them so that only they could do them. My
yeah.
guess is that the military, the weapons industry, that's all they do.
Well, there's a fascinating story, but I've been talking about Ben. What do you want to say on that
No,
point?
I think exactly to that point. There's an interesting story unfolding about that right now in this defense tech space, and it's with Anthropic, the AI company of Cloud AI, in the Pentagon right now. Are they're butting heads big time now. And in short, for your listeners, what's happening is that the good folks at Anthropic, they want to work with the military, but they want to put guardrails in place. They don't want their equipment to be used for mass surveillance, and they don't want it to be used for effectively autonomous killing machines. And the Pentagon, Hegseth specifically, is just not having it. And he has given Anthropic a deadline of tomorrow to drop these guardrails or else. And the or else means they won't work with them. They'll find another tech company that's willing to throw the steering wheel out the window and just let the dice roll when it comes to AI. And the dangers of this, I keep talking to folks about this, because it's kind of in our crazy news cycle, it's maybe on page 4, it's buried so far down. But I do think this is a really pivotal moment that we're seeing right now, because this is effectively, maybe not to call it an Oppenheimer moment, but it could be up there where this is the time where we can say, are we going to have a reasonable conversation about the use of AI in the military? Or are we just going to say we're going to use AI no matter what, no guardrails? Welcome to Terminator 2 and Cyberdyne systems. I don't want to be too apocalyptic, but that's the point we're at right now, because this is going to set a precedent to not just the other than defense contractors here, but to foreign governments around the world. They're all watching this unfold, and if China sees that, okay, the Pentagon's throwing all the guardrails off of AI, they're going to do the same thing. Russia, North Korea, Iran, whoever your boogeyman is, they're going to see what we're doing and say, okay, I guess no regulations on AI. Let's let it run wild.
And the other thing I would say, Ben, is that most people don't know that this conversation is taking place in the defense industry. They just see it in the news sort of every day anyway, right? You're
Right.
going to see an article about what do we do about AI and is it a
But
threat, and what they don't realize is that contest might be decided in the defense industry they're not looking at.
That's
Go
right.
ahead, Bill.
Right.
it's actually come to my neighborhood. I kept getting these texts about this guy, Alex Boris, who's running for my former Congressman Jerry Nadler's seat. He worked for ICE. He enabled ICE. He's an ICE killer, and yet he says he wants to control AI. Well, guess
Hmm.
who's accusing him of being a criminal for working with Palantir? Palantir. The founder of Palantir is funding those ads. And the guy actually had got some modest statewide bill written on AI. Trump wants states to have no rights to regulate that. And the guy did work for Palantir, but he is an advocate of some rules. And so some of the people who work for Palantir hear their founders saying it's criminal to work for Palantir, needless to say, confused. And some of them think there do need to be some regs, but some of it is because they think ultimately that's the only way they're going to survive as an industry. So some of those folks are funding the same guy that Palantir's attacking. And this is like a test case because they're looking, basically these dark money tech folks, or anybody who might even breathe the idea of regulating them, they're going to go after. But then, as you said, once you're established, enough rules to keep barriers to entry for other folks coming in they can live with, especially if it burnishes their image a little bit so they don't look like cold-blooded killers. I mean, if ICE is going to be kidnapping people off the street, killing peaceful demonstrators, you don't really want your company associated with that because you can make money doing every other thing in the world. I mean, this is a pervasive technology. So even when they say that for regulation, we have to look a little deeper. Is that cosmetic? Is that going to make a difference? And in a world, if AI is really everywhere, how do you get the positives and control the negatives? That's all a big challenge. And so anyway, but this thing in my neighborhood, I was like, somebody's got to write about this. Finally, Michelle Goldberg did a column the other day, which was quite strong. And of course, the fact that they're attacking him doesn't mean, okay, you got to vote for this guy, but let's at least have that conversation.
Yeah.
Not that this guy's a criminal, but he's saying, let's do regulation. What's the right kind? Why aren't other people talking about it? And how do you do it? It's complicated. It's not like, oh, hey, that they just took a fighter plane out of the country. It's software. And there's uses that actually are positive. How do you sort that all out? There's got to be a much deeper dialogue. But this dark money is trying to kill dialogue, kill discussion, kill understanding. It's all, trust me. Like Reagan said, trust but verify. I say distrust but verify these folks.
Yeah, well, if only the Supreme Court had done that on all those emergency rulings, right? Instead of let him do what might be unconstitutional until we make a decision, they should have said, no, if someone thinks it's unconstitutional, we'll hold it back until we make a decision. So,
right. No, I mean, efficiency is supposed to be a scalpel, not a sledgehammer.
Exactly.
They were destroying things they didn't understand,
Let me ask you one last, and then I want to get to what do we do about this, and then we'll close. I will say what we're missing, what we're not going to get to, is who are our real enemies? Do we have real enemies? And how much does this size of a budget mean we've got to create them and nurture them and keep them alive? We're not going to have time to get into that. We're not going to have time to get into Gaza or Ukraine. I almost feel like this moved like a train, and yet we could have done 2 hours. But the last question before we ask what can we do about it is you both, I think, sort of mentioned that one of the scarier things about the current, if you will, defense startups, the tech companies moving into the space, is that they want more of a say about policy than the old guys used to. One of you talk about that.
I think it goes exactly to your point that they want that because the old guard wants the old regs in place because they worked for them. They helped to put those old regs in place and they benefited them. And, it's what led to defense consolidation. It's what leads to so many defense contracts have only one bidder because, there's not enough companies in the world to bid on these contracts. So you get these sole source contracts. All of this stuff benefited the old guard. So the new guard's coming in and they want to, they want to flip the apple cart. And so they want to do away with those regs. They want to abolish the regs and they want to make it much more of a free for all. But it's, I think there is some merit to what they're trying to do. Clearly the old system was broken. It's archaic. When you're talking about a plane like the F-35 now, that's still only a part-time fighter jet that we taxpayers have been funding for more than 2 decades, and the plane is still not able to work properly, the system's clearly broken. And so, these tech guys coming in, I'm happy they're flipping the apple cart. The question is, really to Bill's point, he said it so eloquently, what happens next? If they get in there, what do they do next?
And now, by the way, when I said policy, I thought I was referring not to the regulations and the specifications, but to actually our foreign policy.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think it's both. But, uh, to Ben's first point, the big companies hire all these acquisition officials to help them game those complicated systems. The tech guys are like, let's just get rid of that altogether,
Yeah.
including things like independent testing and the positive protections as well as the paperwork. But they also, yes, they feel like they'll say things like, Alex Karp has a book, The Technological Republic. And he says basically we're a nation of slackers with no national mission. But he's come up with one, which is a Manhattan Project for military applications of AI. And he thinks once we have that, we'll have a permanent military edge over China that will restore US global technical dominance. And we've said that before. The technology will save us. It hasn't. China's not going to sit on their hands. It's going to be an arms race. I mean, at the beginning of the nuclear age, they said, oh, we're going to monopolize nuclear weapons. Look how that worked out, So at the same time that they know technology, they have these fantasies of dominance through technology that have never played out. I mean, it's not just technology, it's training, it's motivation, it's do you have a coherent national identity? It's not, I mean, really, our national goal should be militarized AI. I mean, isn't that kind of an impoverished vision of what human beings are supposed to be about? And yet some people are so tech crazy, they would accept that as a full-fledged mission. So it's just it's mind-boggling.
Okay, so by the way, we can talk later about if we want to do another one, because I'm thinking I just realized the other thing I left out was Golden Dome. I mean, there's like if you saw my questions, you'd go, well, the part you haven't asked looks like a hell of a show. But let's go to what can people do? Is there a movement? Your book, I think, is going to do, as much as it gets into people's hands and so on, is going to open some people's eyes. But what do we do about this, guys?
I mean, I think there's a few things. We identify some stuff throughout the book in that a big part of what we wanted to do in the book was not just to name and shame. There's plenty of that in the book. So, if that's your cup of tea, we got plenty of names that you can shame throughout the book. But if we're talking about real change, what we identify in the book is that this is a systemic problem and we need systemic solutions. And a big part of that is changing the incentive structure that drives this industry. And right now, one of those things in the incentives, for example, is at the end of every fiscal year. I talk to active duty military personnel a lot, and they tell me about just how they blow money at the end of the fiscal year because they have to blow that money. If they don't blow that money come September, they're spending millions and sometimes many millions of dollars, and they're just blowing it at the end of the fiscal year just to make sure they get it next year. We got to incentivize them to do the opposite. Every incentive to them is to spend money, not to save money. We got to flip that.
And the whole thing about cost overruns in military contracts, we haven't even mentioned, but it means you can't lose. Go ahead.
Yeah. You got to restructure the military complex. You're absolutely right, Terrence. Restructure those contracts to where we pay better for things that work well, and we don't pay as well for things that don't work. It's business 101 here, but apparently at the largest employer in the nation, they're not doing business 101. We got to flip the script on that. In the influence industry too, one of the counterintuitive things that we recommend is that you need to pay Congress more. You need to pay members of Congress and congressional staff more so that they won't be as incentivized to become lobbyists. And we had multiple conversations with lobbyists as we were writing this book, and one of the most telling ones to me was a friend of mine who became a lobbyist, and I was sort of like, I was giving him some crap, like, man, why are you doing this? And he was like, I can't afford a life in DC. He's got 2 kids. He has 3 kids now. He's got 3 kids. He bought a house and everything. And he was like, I was making $70,000 a year as a staffer. I could barely afford my rent as a staffer, let alone to buy a home and, to have 3 kids. And so he said it to me before anybody else did. He was like, pay staffers more. If I'd gotten paid more, I wouldn't be a lobbyist. Nobody wants to be a lobbyist. We got to incentivize them to not do it.
By the way, one thing that's happened over the years that is off to the side of your book, but has an impact on it, is how the economic life of Washington, D.C. changed over the few decades. And I'm not even referring to the lobbyists. I'm saying that it used to be government and Virginia and Maryland, and now it's government and high tech. That what's going on in Fairfax and Alexandria and all those places rivals Boston, the Bay Area, and suddenly that changes the economy of who can afford to live there, and yet
That's right.
staffers didn't get. Oh, we see there's a lot of high tech firms in Alexandria. We're going to raise your salary. That did not happen. Go ahead,
Right.
Bill.
Well, I have another angle on what to do, but I have to say, my hope was Ben was going to become a lobbyist while we were writing the book, because I thought sales would go through the roof, you know.
The day is young, Hartung. The day is young.
That's true. That's
It's
true.
not out in paperback yet. There's a
People always say to me, Bill, why didn't you sell it? I said, nobody's buying. I have never been put to the test. But the other side of it is people feeling empowered to take on this beast. And for the first 30 or 40 years of my career, I was just telling them how powerful the other side was. They were agreeing and they were going home, you know, taking their marbles. But there's a lot of movements getting some traction on issues like militarization of the border and of the police and the seizing of the budget by the growth of. There's all these things have an element of militarism being attacked, different pieces of the elephant, however you want to look at it. I think that there's got to be a little more coming together. Not that people put away their first priority, but they understand that they're working in the same direction, some tolerance, some cooperation, and there's common villains. I mean, Palantir does the border, does ICE, is doing autonomous weapons, is backing some pretty scary anti-democratic folks. So 5 years ago, some of the students doing this were like, is there one company that's involved in every possible aspect of this? I wasn't really sure, but because their business is surveillance, it's information crunching, they're everywhere. I mean, they were, you know, Israel used their stuff. They're reforming, quote unquote, the British healthcare system. They're all over. Wherever you look, there's Palantir is there. It's like the first time I went to Disneyland, there's the Small World ride with the little funny people. And on the way out, it says, sponsored by Bank of America. Wherever you go in the small, small world, Bank of America is there. Well, I think Palantir should steal that slogan because it's actually accurate in their case. You know.
wow. So, where should people, if they want to, besides read the book, if they want to get involved, if this is something that they think they're ready to take on, what should they be doing? And my guess about everything nowadays, and by nowadays I mean in February of 26, is get active in the election and vote. The problem being that so much of even the good guys are not necessarily on the right side of these issues. But
I think that's exactly right. And what I was going to say was get active, not just in the election. Don't wait till November. Get active right now. Get active in the primaries. Because I think you know what happens. So many districts in the U.S., the vast majority of districts are safe districts for either one party or the other. So if you wait till November, you're missing the mark. You know that your real chance for change in Congress is now. And get involved in those primaries. And, you know, for your viewers, I think there's this sort of belief, myth that we try to dispel in the very first chapter of this book that, you know, we have one war party, the Republican Party, and then we have one peace party, the Democratic Party. But it's hooey, you know, as we destroy in the opening, we destroy that myth in the opening chapter of this book. You look across presidents, from Biden to Obama, even, you might love them, but, Obama, after getting the Nobel Peace Prize, he oversaw the two largest military budgets in U.S. history since World War II, the Peace Prize guy. So, he didn't get us out of Iraq and Afghanistan. So, if you are a Democrat listening to this, get involved in your primaries, go and ask, hard questions at that town hall. Is that person who you think is, representative of the Peace Party, are they actually anti-militarism? Are they going to pursue a more peaceful, a more restrained U.S. foreign policy? Because for so many Democrats these days, the answer to that question is no. They're just going right along. They're voting for all these increases in defense spending. They're keeping, right now, the talk about the Iran war is so telling because there are so few Democrats who are actually jumping up and saying, hey, maybe it's a dumb idea to bomb Iran again. And for your listeners, please go to the primaries, make people uncomfortable by asking these questions, and maybe we'll get a better mix of folks in Congress come 2027.
That's right. Let me just say one other quick thing, Bill, which is that obviously what they did in kidnapping Maduro in Venezuela, what they've done with the extrajudicial killings in the Caribbean, these would be administration challenging acts any other time.
Right.
And they're not even they're like yesterday's news somehow. It's
Right.
Epstein Day.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we were with a group that was trying to figure out how much the Venezuela operation costs. And a friend of ours said, oh, next week it'll be something else. And it was Greenland. So there's one of the Trump folks, Steve Bannon, said, well, it's about muzzle velocity. If you throw 6 bad ideas out there at once, 2 or 3 of them are going to get through. So people are a little bit on their back heels about that. And then, the parties, militarism is kind of in their lifeblood, but sometimes different. Like, W. Bush was more about boots on the ground. Obama was the drone guy. Biden was selling weapons for Gaza and Ukraine. So it's taking different guises. And I think the whole idea of automated warfare is, well, hey, we're not going to get hurt, but we're probably going to inflict a lot of damage. And surprisingly enough, when you inflict damage on human beings, there's a response.
Yeah. And the other thing
it's not a good response.
If I can, Bill, is that people, the person who is going against the establishment in a primary, too often they'll say, I'm going to stick my neck out on LGBTQ and I'm going to stick my neck out on immigration. I'm not going to stick my neck out on defense. It's just not on people's radar. And I'm afraid that's what you get is people who, even the progressive candidate, this is one that they just are on auto.
Yeah, I think the problem is that you can't artificially separate them because they're interconnected. And unless you take them all on, you're not going to make progress on any of them. But it's the first thought is like, oh God, I got to take on those companies too. And they're taking us on. They're shaping our futures. Yes, we do have to.
Yeah. And let me just say one last thing in terms of getting active in the primaries. In addition to maybe saying I want to canvass and so on, if you give money to a candidate early, it's better than giving it to them late. The earlier you donate to political campaigns, the more they can depend and make plans, and even giving monthly allows them to actually say, okay, we can mount this big a campaign. So
well,
it's just people.
Emily's List stands for early money is like yeast. It's exactly your point. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, we got to bring it to a close. And as I said, the things we didn't talk about would be a great show. So again, the book is The $1 Trillion War Machine, How Runaway Military Spending Drives America into Foreign Wars and Bankrupts Us at Home. The website is Quincy Inst, I-N-S-T, Quincy, INST.org. For this conversation, many other interviews and articles to join me in pursuit of a world that just might work, go to TerrenceMcNally.net, TerrenceMcNally.net, or a world that just might work.com. To the same website. If you want to get my weekly email announcement telling you who's going to be on, what we're going to talk about, and links to 10 or 15 articles to flesh out the conversation, email me at TEMcNally, TEMCNALLY @mac.com. Sign up at my site or email me. You can also subscribe and listen to Freeform Podcast at all of those podcast sites, and you'll find years of podcasts at my site and at most of those sites. I get these spam things that say you have 700 episodes. Why aren't you getting more attention? So there's a lot in those archives. You can also follow me on Twitter at McNally Terrence. Thanks to Kiana Williams in production, George Vasilopoulos at Progressive Voices, and most of all you, my listeners. Please share this podcast widely. And finally, thank you, Bill Hartung and Ben Freeman. Keep up your good work.
Well, if the world ends up working, it's because of conversations like the ones you're having. So we thank you.
Thank you, Terrence.
Great. Thank you, guys.